A stranger gave him a coin. But it was no ordinary coin. The stranger's coin. The story is old, passed down from one generation to the next, always told on long dark nights when the wind howls and the shadows grow long. It starts with a man named Henry Bell, a woodsman from the small town of Ravens Hollow, nestled deep in the Appalachian foothills. Some say that Ravens Hollow was cursed from the very beginning, the trees whispering secrets and the winds carrying voices no one could explain. But that's a tale for another time. This one starts with Henry and the stranger who came to town one fateful night. Henry was a simple man, hardworking and quiet, known to the townsfolk for his skill with an axe and his ability to track the deer that roamed the wilds. He had little to his name, save a small cabin on the edge of the forest and a dog named Buck. He lived alone, never married, never having much use for the distractions of town life. His life was a routine: work, eat, sleep. But one evening, as the sun dipped low and the light of day began to fade, Henry's life took a turn he'd never have anticipated. It was late in the evening when Henry returned to his cabin, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple, the scent of pine heavy in the air. His dog, Buck, was by his side as loyal as ever, his tail wagging lazily. Henry had just passed the old oak tree when he noticed a figure standing at the edge of the woods. It wasn't uncommon to see strangers wandering near the outskirts of town, but this one was different. He was tall, too tall for a man, and he wore a dark cloak that seemed to swallow the light around him. His face was obscured by the hood, but there was something about the way he stood, an unnatural stillness, that set Henry on edge. "Evening, stranger," Henry called, adjusting his grip on the axe slung over his shoulder. He wasn't a man easily intimidated, but something about the figure made his skin prickle. The stranger didn't move at first, but then he turned slowly, his head tilting just slightly as if he had been expecting Henry all along. His eyes, when they caught the last glint of the setting sun, gleamed unnaturally, too bright, too cold. There was no warmth in those eyes, no recognition of humanity. Just a cold, infinite darkness. "You look weary, woodsman," the stranger's voice was deep, almost soothing, yet carrying an undertone of something ancient, something distant. "Might I offer you something to ease your journey?" Henry, a bit wary but never one to shy away from conversation, nodded cautiously. "I'm just getting home. What's your business out here, stranger?" The man's lips curled into something like a smile. It was small, fleeting, but there was something unsettling about it. "I have no business, no home, no place to go. I wander the earth, giving gifts to those who are deserving." Henry raised an eyebrow. "Gifts, you say? And what kind of gifts might that be?" Without a word, the stranger reached into the folds of his cloak and pulled out a coin. The metal gleamed, catching the last light of the evening. It was a simple thing, yet Henry could feel its weight as if it had been forged in the heart of a mountain. The coin was old, older than anything Henry had ever seen, with markings that seemed to swirl and shift, as if the very symbols on it were alive. "It's not for me to say whether you are deserving, only you can decide that," the stranger said, holding out the coin. "Take it. Let it guide you." Henry felt an odd pull in his chest, a compulsion to take the coin. He wasn't sure why, but he reached out and grasped it. The moment his fingers touched the cool metal, he felt a sharp pang, like a flicker of something deep within him, a memory he couldn't quite place. The air around him seemed to grow colder, and for the first time that night, the forest felt alive as if it were watching him. "I don't want no trouble," Henry said, his voice unsteady as he pocketed the coin. "I'm just looking to get home." The stranger tilted his head again as though considering Henry's words. "I'm not here to bring trouble, only to offer what's been given. You'll see in time. The coin has its uses and it will find you when you need it most." Henry nodded, his eyes narrowing. Something about the whole situation didn't sit right with him, but he didn't want to seem rude or ungrateful. He turned and walked quickly toward his cabin, Buck trotting ahead, but his thoughts were clouded. The stranger's words hung in the air, lingering like smoke, and the coin in his pocket seemed heavier with every step. That night, after a quick supper, Henry tried to shake off the unease that had settled in his gut. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the night around him, the wind rustling through the trees, the distant call of an owl. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't sleep. The weight of the coin pressed into his side, and every time he turned, it seemed to call to him, whispering in the back of his mind. Finally, after what felt like hours of tossing and turning, he could take it no longer. He pulled the coin from his pocket and held it in his hand, the smooth metal cold against his palm. The markings on the coin shifted in the dim light, moving in patterns he couldn't understand. It was mesmerizing. He found his gaze fixed on the swirling symbols, drawn deeper and deeper into its pull. The moment his fingers tightened around it, there was a flash, a brilliant, blinding light that seemed to burst from the coin itself, flooding the room in an instant. Henry gasped, dropping the coin onto the floor, but the light didn't go away. It swirled around him, filling the cabin, and suddenly, everything felt wrong. The air grew colder still, and the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch, growing longer, deeper. From the darkness, a voice rose, a whisper, soft at first but gaining strength. "Henry Bell?" He froze, his heart pounding in his chest as the voice echoed through the room. It was not the stranger's voice. This voice was older, hollow, like the earth itself had spoken. Henry scrambled to his feet, backing away from the shadows. The coin on the floor began to spin on its own, faster and faster, and as it did, the symbols on its surface began to glow, casting an eerie light around the room. The whispers grew louder, more frantic. "You've accepted what you cannot control," the voice whispered again, and this time Henry could feel the words inside his chest, vibrating in his bones. "The coin is no ordinary gift. It is bound by an ancient power, a force that cannot be undone." Henry's mind raced. What had he done? What had he taken from the stranger? What was this power that now consumed him? The coin came to a sudden stop, its glow fading, but the shadows remained, the room now suffocating with an unnatural presence. Henry's breath came in shallow gasps, his body trembling with fear. He had taken the coin and now there was no turning back. The voice came again, softer now but no less terrifying. "You will see soon enough, Henry Bell. The price of curiosity is steep." Henry couldn't escape the feeling that something had just awoken, a force that would follow him for the rest of his days. And so, Henry Bell's life, once simple and straightforward, would never be the same.
The price of curiosity. The days following Henry's encounter with the stranger blurred together, but the sense of unease never left him. It clung to him like the thick fog that rolled down from the mountains, creeping into every corner of his life. The coin, though tucked safely away in his pocket, seemed to pulse with an energy that was both unsettling and impossible to ignore. He kept it with him at all times, as if some invisible force was making sure it stayed close, always within reach. At first, the strange occurrences were subtle. A chair that was in one spot last night would be found in a different corner of the cabin the next morning. The firewood he stacked neatly would be disarranged, the kindling scattered across the floor as though someone, or something, had moved it. But these things, though eerie, could easily be explained away by Henry's exhaustion or a mischievous wind. What truly shook him, though, were the dreams. Every night, without fail, the dream would come. The same dark room, the same twisting shadows, the same figure at the center of it all. The stranger. But now, Henry could see his face, a face pale and gaunt, eyes sunken deep into their sockets, his skin stretched too tight over the bones. The figure would speak, his voice a low murmur that echoed around Henry's mind even as he woke. "You've been chosen, Henry Bell. You have taken what you cannot return." Each time he awoke, drenched in cold sweat, the words would linger in his mind. And each time, the coin in his pocket would seem a little heavier. One evening, after another restless night, Henry decided to take the coin to the town's blacksmith, old Jim Carver. Jim was a man who had seen much in his day, seen the old world and the new, had felt the weight of time on his shoulders. If anyone could make sense of the cursed coin, it was him. Jim's workshop was tucked away at the edge of the town, just past the old mill that had long since fallen into disrepair. The air smelled of smoke, steel, and the earthy scent of oil and sweat. The sound of the hammer striking an anvil echoed in the air as Henry entered, the warmth from the forge wrapping around him like a blanket. "Jim!" Henry called, his voice tense. Jim looked up from the anvil, his gnarled hands still gripping the hammer. His eyes narrowed when he saw the coin in Henry's outstretched hand. "What have you brought me, Henry?" It's a coin," Henry began, his voice shaky. "But it's not like any coin I've ever seen. Something's wrong with it. I can feel it. It's heavy with something I can't explain." Jim stepped closer, his heavy boots thudding on the wooden floor. His weathered face seemed to age another year as he examined the coin, his eyes widening ever so slightly. "I've seen this before," he muttered under his breath, more to himself than to Henry. "You've seen it?" Henry's voice cracked, the air thick with dread. "Aye, lad," Jim said, his voice low. "This coin has a long history. A cursed history." Henry took a step back. "A curse?" Jim nodded slowly, his face grim. "It's said that this coin was forged during the days of the Old World, before the settlers came. It belonged to a figure, a spirit, some say, who wandered the land, offering gifts to those foolish enough to accept. But these gifts came with a terrible price. Each soul that took one of these coins became bound to the spirit, trapped by a curse that would follow them for all their days." Henry's heart sank. "And if I've taken it, then you've already begun paying the price," Jim said softly, setting the coin on the table. "The coin has a way of taking things from you, slowly, bit by bit. It starts with the little things, strange dreams, whispers, things moving around you when no one's there. But it will get worse. It'll take more, until there's nothing left." Henry felt a cold sweat bead on his brow. "How do I break the curse?" Jim shook his head, his weathered hands trembling as he picked up the coin again. "That's the trouble. No one knows. The stories say that the coin must be returned to the spirit who gave it, but that spirit is long gone. And if you try to get rid of it, it'll find a way back to you. There's no escaping it, Henry." A chill ran through Henry's spine. He had taken the coin from the stranger, a man who was more than just a man, a being tied to something ancient and dark. The weight of his decision crashed down on him, and he suddenly felt like the walls of the room were closing in. "I didn't know," Henry whispered, his voice hoarse. "I didn't know what I was taking." Jim placed the coin back on the table, his face softening with sympathy. "You couldn't have known. But now you must face it. And you must be careful. The spirit that gave you this coin is watching. It waits for the moment when the price becomes too high." Henry felt his knees grow weak. The world around him seemed to spin as if the ground beneath him had shifted. Jim's voice seemed distant, like a whisper on the wind. "That man who gave you the coin," Jim continued, "he wasn't just a wanderer. He's a collector of souls." Henry's breath caught in his throat. "What do you mean?" Jim leaned in close, his voice barely audible. "He collects the souls of the cursed, those who accept his gifts. And once he has enough, he takes them to the dark places, the places where the sun never rises. And they never return." Henry felt the ground beneath him crumble as Jim's words sank in. The coin, the stranger, the curse, it was all too much. He stumbled out of the blacksmith's shop, his mind racing, his heart pounding. As he walked back toward his cabin, the evening air felt colder than it had ever been. The shadows seemed to stretch farther, the trees rustling with a sound that seemed to whisper his name. The coin in his pocket burned against his skin, as if it were alive, feeding off his fear. When he reached his cabin, he didn't go inside. He stood there, staring at the door, his mind swimming with thoughts of the stranger and the curse that now bound him. Was there a way out? Or was he doomed to a life of torment, bound forever by the coin he had accepted so blindly? The wind picked up, howling through the trees, and Henry heard it again, the whispering. It came from everywhere and nowhere, a voice in the darkness that seemed to call to him, beckoning him into the woods. And then, for the first time since he had taken the coin, Henry realized the truth. The spirit had come for him. The price of the coin. Henry's feet felt like lead as he stood at the threshold of his cabin. The shadows around him seemed to gather, to shift, as though they were alive, watching him with an intensity that he could feel deep in his bones. The coin, still nestled in his pocket, pressed against him like a living thing, and for the first time, he realized it wasn't just the coin that was cursed, it was him. The wind howled through the trees, and in the distance, he could hear the faint sound of something moving, something unnatural. The ground beneath him seemed to tremble as if the earth itself was shifting, pushing him towards some terrible fate he couldn't avoid. Henry had tried to run from the curse, to rid himself of the coin, but it had always found its way back to him. No matter what he did, it clung to him like an anchor, a weight that he couldn't shake. And now, standing in the fading twilight, he knew there was only one way to end it. He had to confront the stranger, the one who had given him the coin, the one who had cursed him. Taking a deep breath, Henry turned away from the cabin and walked toward the forest. Buck, his loyal dog, had long since disappeared into the woods, no longer at his side. The world felt empty, the trees standing like silent sentinels, watching him with eyes that weren't his own. The air grew colder with each step, and Henry could feel the presence of something watching him, something ancient, something that had been waiting. The deeper he went into the woods, the more the trees seemed to close in around him, their branches twisting like fingers reaching for him, pulling him deeper into their embrace. The whispering grew louder, clearer now, as if the wind itself carried the voice of the stranger. Henry Bell. The voice was low and melodic, yet it sent a chill racing through his spine. It was the same voice he had heard in his dreams, the same voice that had haunted him since the moment he'd accepted the coin. And now, it was real. It was here calling him forward. "You cannot escape what you have unleashed." The words were not a warning, they were a promise. Henry's heart pounded in his chest as he walked deeper into the woods, the darkness closing in around him. He had come this far, and there was no turning back. He had to face the stranger, to confront the spirit that had cursed him. If he didn't, he would be consumed, just like the others who had taken the coin before him. And then, through the trees, he saw it, a figure standing in the clearing, waiting for him. The stranger. The man was just as Henry remembered, tall and imposing, his dark cloak billowing around him like smoke. His face was still hidden in the shadows of his hood, but Henry could feel his eyes on him, even if he couldn't see them. The air around him seemed to hum with an energy that made Henry's skin crawl. "You've come," the stranger said, his voice both welcoming and filled with something darker. "I knew you would. You cannot resist the pull of the coin. It was meant to be." Henry clenched his fists, the weight of the coin in his pocket suddenly unbearable. "What do you want from me?" The stranger stepped closer, his movements fluid and unnatural. "I want nothing from you, Henry Bell. You are the one who has already given everything. The coin is mine. Your soul is mine. And now, you must pay the price for your curiosity." Henry's heart raced as the stranger's words sank in. He had known, deep down, that this was where it would lead. He had taken the coin without thinking of the consequences, without understanding the power it held. And now, it was too late to undo what had been done. "What's the price?" Henry whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. The stranger's lips curled into a smile, though it was not a smile of comfort. "You will see soon enough. But it is not for you to choose. The coin has already decided your fate." Henry's breath caught in his throat as he realized what the stranger meant. The coin wasn't just a gift. It was a binding. A chain that had linked him to the spirit, to the curse, and now there was no way to escape it. The stranger reached into his cloak and pulled out something small, something Henry couldn't quite make out. But when the stranger held it up to the dim light, Henry's heart skipped a beat. It was another coin, exactly like the one he had taken, but this one was different. The markings on it were sharper, the symbols etched deeper, almost as if they had been carved into the metal by something far older than time itself. "This," the stranger said, holding the coin up to the sky, "is the coin of your soul. It will mark the end of your journey, and the beginning of mine." The wind began to pick up, howling through the trees as the stranger stepped forward, his hand extending toward Henry. The coin in his palm gleamed, glowing with an eerie, unnatural light. Henry stepped back, his heart racing. He had no choice but to accept the curse, to accept the consequences of his actions. But in the back of his mind, he remembered what Jim Carver had said, that the coin could never truly be destroyed. It would always find its way back. And now, Henry understood why. The stranger's eyes glowed, an unnatural light burning through the shadows of his hood. "It's done," the stranger said softly. "You are mine now, bound forever by the coin. The price of your curiosity has been paid." Henry's body trembled as the stranger's grip tightened on his arm, the cold metal of the coin burning through his skin. The world around him seemed to warp and twist, the trees bending unnaturally, the ground shifting beneath his feet. And then, in a flash, everything went dark. When Henry awoke, he was no longer in the clearing. He was standing in a vast, empty space. A place where time seemed to have no meaning, where the air was thick with the scent of decay. And in the distance, he could see something moving, a figure in the shadows, walking toward him. He knew who it was. The stranger. And now, Henry Bell understood the true nature of the curse. It was not just about the coin. It was about the soul of anyone who dared to take it. Once taken, it could never be returned. It was bound to the spirit, to the darkness that had claimed it. And Henry would never be free. The end.